By late 1944, ground crews at Finsterwald worked through cold fog to keep aging fighters barely operational.
Mechanics at Jüterbog struggled with limited jet components, revealing how desperate the late-war German aircraft situation had become.
Technicians at Lechfeld inspected cracked jet turbines, knowing each repair delayed inevitable mechanical failures in combat.
Pilots in Normandy faced relentless Allied pressure that exhausted aircraft reserves faster than ground crews could recover them.
Repeated Allied bombing forced crews at Gatow to rebuild shattered flight lines before dawn flights could even be considered.
During the Ardennes offensive, many frontline crews depended on improvised repairs to keep even a few aircraft serviceable.
Winter cold stifled control surfaces and added new hazards to already strained fighters guarding Germany's shrinking airspace.
Fuel shortages forced crews at Munich-Riem to hand-pump aviation fuel, delaying sorties and limiting pilot readiness.
Incomplete jets at Prague-Gabeli often awaited parts for weeks, reflecting production delays overwhelming Germany's final campaign. At Vienna-Aspern, crews used improvised fixes to offset structural fatigue that increasingly undermined fighter performance.
Unreliable radios at Parchim hindered coordination, limiting pilots' ability to react to rapidly shifting Allied formations.
Fuel leaks plagued money interceptors, adding dangerous uncertainty to missions already outmatched by growing Allied air power.
Fuel rationing at Salzburg meant pilots often launched with only minutes of operational endurance for interception attempts.
Night fighter crews struggled to maintain radar arrays that deteriorated under constant weather exposure and limited spare parts.
Concealment became essential as Allied reconnaissance increased, forcing pilots to wait long hours under camouflage netting.
Eastern Front cold froze aircraft brakes, forcing crews to warm assemblies manually before launching defensive sorties.
Fuel convoys dwindled in Bremen, leaving logistical crews unable to supply squadrons with necessary sortie volumes.
Sector commanders in Lower Silesia often relied on outdated intelligence, complicating already strained defensive operations.
With resources collapsing, crews near Dresden cannibalized grounded aircraft to maintain a fraction of operational strength.
Short fuel windows forced launches at dawn, giving pilots only brief opportunities to intercept heavily protected Allied formations.
At Stendal, delayed supply convoys left pilots uncertain whether critical ammunition would arrive before the next interception call.
Failing oxygen systems at Erfurt reduced safe altitude ceilings, limiting pilots' ability to challenge high-flying Allied bombers. Tailwheel failures grounded many fighters, requiring crews at Rebstock to improvise repairs from minimal spare parts. Scavenged components became essential as scattered formations tried sustaining operations with rapidly dwindling factory support. Ammunition shortages at Echterdingen meant fighters often launched with reduced loads, diminishing already strained defensive capabilities. Contaminated hydraulic fluid grounded several fighters at Dortmund, burdening crews already struggling with relentless maintenance demands.
Pilots near Würzburg often supervised rushed assembly work, hoping each airframe could withstand even one mission.
Warped jet compressor vanes at Hamburg limited engine reliability, constraining already fragile Me-262 sortie schedules.
Bavarian units recorded severe fuel shortages that left entire wings grounded during critical moments of defense.
Crews near Leipzig relied on camouflage to shield aircraft from reconnaissance that threatened remaining operational strength. Persistent rain flooded wheel wells, forcing crews near Hanover to drain gear housings before each attempted sortie. Fog frequently disrupted sector communications in Saxony, leading to delayed scramble orders during crucial defensive engagements.
Snow-buried aircraft in East Prussia, consuming manpower needed elsewhere simply to prepare fighters for flight.
Repair detachments struggled reshaping bent airframes, knowing many fighters would still fly with dangerous structural weaknesses.
Improvised departure equipment reflected the Luftwaffe's deteriorating infrastructure, as Ruhr airfields struggled through constant raids.
Fuel crews in Bohemia divided dwindling reserves among scattered squadrons, forcing agonizing decisions about operational priorities.
Near Berlin, crews patched bomb-scarred tarmac daily, struggling to maintain launch surfaces for remaining defensive fighters.
Hurried mission updates reflected the Luftwaffe's reactive posture, as Allied sorties outpaced available defensive planning.
Manual fueling slowed every launch in Westphalia, reflecting shortages that crippled the Luftwaffe's final campaign tempo.
As units withdrew into Austria, makeshift runway markers became essential for safe departures in poor visibility. Frozen engines slowed every launch, forcing crews across southern Germany to battle cold before confronting enemy aircraft. Unreliable cannon feeds undermined interception effectiveness near Munich, leaving pilots uncertain their weapons would fire when needed.
Pilots along the Upper Rhine inspected patchwork wings, hoping improvised repairs held during high-stress maneuvers.
Cracked radiators grounded several Augsburg fighters, further thinning already overstretched defensive rotations.
Rocket shortages weakened interception tactics in Thuringia, reducing the Luftwaffe's ability to disrupt bomber formations.
Rain-warped antennas complicated communications in the Bavarian forest, delaying critical interception directives.
Damaged drop tanks limited extended-range sorties in Austria, restricting already scarce interception opportunities. Electrical overloads burned wiring looms in Pomerania, grounding fighters until scarce replacements arrived. Frozen lubrication systems seized engines in the borderlands, consuming vital hours needed for defense.
With parts depleted across the Ruhr, supply crews rationed essentials that once flowed uninterrupted.
Along the Frisian coast, shrinking aircraft numbers forced constant recalculations of feasible interception routes. Runway damage near Dresden forced crews to guide fighters around dangerous gaps during takeoff attempts.
Cracked exhaust manifolds weakened engine output, straining northern airfields already stretched beyond capacity.
Flak damage left rudders dangerously weakened, yet pilots in Hesse prepared for another mission.
Waterlogged radios in Swabia jeopardized coordination, forcing crews to salvage whatever communication remained possible.
Scavenged parts from scrapyards sustained the last operational fighters in southeastern Germany.
In the Danube Valley, depleted patrols forced commanders to redraw sortie plans daily.
Improvised flares guided final night departures, symbolizing the Luftwaffe's diminishing resources and resolve. By late 1944, ground crews struggled to keep weary fighters operational as fuel shortages steadily undermined.
Improvised maintenance became essential as spare parts vanished, forcing aircrews to adapt aging aircraft to impossible operational demands.
Pilots entered each briefing fearing overwhelming Allied numbers, knowing every mission strained Germany's diminishing aerial resistance. Freezing temperatures complicated every task, as bomber crews battled weather conditions that further narrowed Germany's operational possibilities. The Me-262 offered hope, yet its fragile engines demanded constant attention that Germany's exhausted support crews.
Nightly Allied raids left airfields repeatedly crippled, forcing Luftwaffe crews into endless cycles of clearing debris before missions.
Increasing Allied air dominance forced the Luftwaffe to hide aircraft beneath improvised camouflage intended to extend their fleeting survival.
Maintenance crews increasingly relied on salvaged components, transforming workshops into rescue stations for Germany's failing air fleet.
Desperation pushed Germany toward untested prototypes that consumed resources without producing the decisive relief commanders desperately sought.
Jets were hidden in forest fringe to evade Allied patrols, reflecting the Luftwaffe's increasingly defensive and desperate posture.
Commanders faced impossible choices as shrinking fuel reserves forced cancellations that steadily surrendered the skies to Allied forces.
Fuel rationing dictated every operational decision, reducing once mighty formations to scattered flights struggling to mount meaningful resistance.
Broken aircraft became sources of spare parts, symbolizing how attrition forced the Luftwaffe into a state of perpetual salvage.
Ammunition stores dwindled so sharply that crews blended mismatched rounds simply to keep fighters marginally battle-ready.
Exhaustion permeated every squadron as pilots endured relentless operations without the rest or resources required for sustained defense.
Damaged munitions highlighted the logistical collapse, demonstrating how Germany's air campaign deteriorated under relentless material shortages.
Daily inspections revealed growing devastation, reminding pilots that each mission launched from airfields increasingly threatened by attack.
Fuel deliveries dwindled to a trickle, leaving airfields operating at the edge of collapse as supplies vanished across Germany.
Final sorties reflected fading resolve as pilots launched from shrinking strongholds in a campaign nearly exhausted of strength.
Maintenance crews faced impossible repair demands as jet airframes returned repeatedly with structural failures from rushed production.
Ground crews fought worsening shortages of fuel and tools, forcing improvisation that further slowed already strained flight operations. Pilots increasingly accepted that many sorties would end with forced landings, as fuel deliveries became dangerously unpredictable.
Constant air attacks forced technicians to hide aircraft between missions, reducing already scarce maintenance time.
Freezing temperatures complicated engine starts, forcing ground crews to rely on improvised heating methods and dwindling electrical supplies. Jet mechanics repeatedly confronted ruined turbines, because low-grade metals degraded rapidly under combat stresses.
Fuel pumps frequently failed, leaving aircraft partially fueled and reducing available sorties during critical defensive periods.
Landing gear failures plagued returning jets, threatening both pilot survival and airfield runway availability. Disrupted communications slowed scramble orders, leaving pilots grounded during moments of urgent defensive need.
High-speed operations often fractured canopies, creating dangerous cockpit hazards that maintenance crews struggled to replace. Frequent raids forced crews to rebuild control facilities from debris, just to maintain basic flight coordination.
With motor vehicles depleted, ground teams transported essential components by hand through snow-choked airfields.
Wing failures became more frequent as stressed components outlasted their intended service life without proper inspection intervals.
Fuel shortages forced commanders to prioritize defensive sorties, grounding many pilots despite urgent operational needs.
Testing degraded engines became hazardous, as overstressed turbines occasionally failed catastrophically during ground trials.
Fragmentary radar signals left pilots uncertain about incoming raids, complicating already strained intercept planning.
Improvised workshops produced replacement parts, though rough fabrication often reduced component reliability under combat loads.
Instant crater repairs exhausted crews, consuming hours needed for aircraft maintenance and limiting flight availability.
Exhausted teams worked through darkness, balancing urgent repairs against dwindling manpower and mounting operational losses.
Ground crews searched silent hangars for usable parts as the last operational fighters dwindled to almost nothing.
Fuel shortages forced ground crews to ration every liter, choosing which pilots could even attempt a final sortie.
Ammunition stocks ran so low that pilots sometimes launched with barely enough rounds for a single engagement.
Crews dismantled wrecks for spare instruments, knowing each salvaged part might keep another aircraft airborne briefly.
Pilots often flew machines so worn that every mission carried mechanical risks as dangerous as enemy fighters.
As front lines collapsed, Luftwaffe crews abandoned forward fields, leaving equipment they no longer had fuel to move.
Without functioning fuel trucks, ground teams improvised hand pump systems that slowed operations to a crawl.
Crews disabled remaining field equipment to prevent its capture, marking another sign that the air war was effectively over.
Command staff recognized the end approaching as orders shifted from operations to preserving personnel during surrender.
Many pilots stepped from their aircraft, knowing they would never fly them again under wartime conditions.
Ground crews collected papers and effects as the final act of a force exhausted beyond its limits.